The world is about to witness what could be a defining moment for big tech and social media companies. In a few hours, the CEO of Meta, Mark Zuckerberg, will testify at a closely watched trial in Los Angeles. At the heart of the case, charges against Meta and Google that they designed Instagram and YouTube to be deliberately addictive for children and teenagers. Lawyers argue features such as infinite scroll, and auto video play, and recommendations from algorithms were knowingly incorporated to encourage compulsive use, accusing the firms of creating what they called digital casinos. Well, bringing the lawsuit is a 20-year-old Californian woman identified as Kaley, along with her mother. The plaintiff says she started using the platforms as a child and alleges the apps fueled depression and suicidal thoughts. Well, Meta and Google deny the allegations. They say they've worked to add features that keep users safe, and they argue that mental health is influenced by many factors beyond social media use. The legal cases reflect broader global concerns that have prompted several countries to restrict social media use for children and teenagers. In April last year, China's internet regulator introduced a so-called minor mode for mobile devices. It limits screen time for children, imposes curfews, and ensures content is age-appropriate. One of the toughest measures came in Australia at the end of 2025 when a law blocking access to under-16s came into effect. Companies that fail to comply can face penalties of $35 million. And in France, the lower house of Parliament passed a bill in January to ban social media use for under-15s. And the UK is also looking at introducing a similar ban later in the year. Well, let me introduce you now to Adele Walton, who's an author and online safety campaigner with families and survivors to prevent online suicide harm. She specialises on the human impacts of digital technology and social media. And Adele lost her sister, Aimee, after being exposed to online forums that encourage self-harm. She joins us from London. A very warm welcome to you and many thanks for your time. So, Adele, this is a truly historic moment, isn't it? For the first time, we've got Mark Zuckerberg. He isn't answering to a congressional committee. He's answering to a jury of 12 ordinary citizens. You've campaigned with bereaved families for years. What does this specific moment, seeing him in the witness chair, mean for the communities that you represent?
It definitely is a moment of hope. It is finally the reckoning that social media companies deserve. I feel we're really at a critical point here, and we're finally waking up to the harms that these companies have cashed in on over the past 2 decades or so. And yeah, it really does give bereaved families a sense of hope that we're finally being listened to.
And Adele, as I mentioned in the introduction to you, this is personal for you. You are Gen Z, you're a digital native, you've grown up with this tech, but you believe this tech also had a role in your sister's death. Her name is Aimee, and she died after being exposed to forums that encouraged self-harm. What measures do you think could have saved her life and the lives and health of others like her?
Well, we still haven't had back Aimee's devices, so we have not had our inquest yet, and we don't actually know critically what Aimee was looking for and what drew her down this rabbit hole of harm, other than the fact that she was on this website that promotes suicide and self-harm. So, you know, there are still a lot of unanswered questions, but massively a crucial part of this is a ban on the addictive design that sends young people down these rabbit holes in the first place. You know, we've heard from the likes of Ian Russell, who lost his daughter Molly to this type of harmful material on Pinterest and Instagram. And we need to finally wake up and listen and recognise that this is the solution here. A ban on addictive design would actually prevent so many of these harms in the first place, and crucially, it would save lives.
Now, we know the tech companies often argue that they are not responsible for what users post themselves, but this trial is about the very design of the platforms, isn't it? I mean, the plaintiff, known as Kaley in this case, is suing because of things like autoplay, infinite scroll, that for her became addictive. Adele, if we start holding companies, though, liable for the very architecture of their apps, I mean, doesn't that kill the free-flowing nature of the internet itself? Also, we are talking right now partly with the help of social media, and for many youngsters it can be an answer to loneliness.
Of course, you know, and I see it from both sides. As a Gen Z that grew up on social media, my sister was neurodivergent, so she benefited in many ways from the community that she sought out online when she was a teenager and she was struggling in school to find those friends. But this doesn't have to be this way. We don't need to have a digital infrastructure, platforms that are occupied by a handful of small, very rich companies that push us towards harmful content. That simply shouldn't be an argument. And I think that what we're realizing is actually there can be a different way. You know, many of these features didn't exist in the early days of the internet, in the early days of social media. Addictive design was implemented much later on, around the age that I was about 12, 13, and it kept us in those cycles of harmful material, whether it's pro-Ana content or for girls, or, you know, pro-misogyny content for boys. So I feel that we're realizing that actually it doesn't have to be that way, and there is definitely an alternative, and that would be changing the design at its core.
Now, we know no cameras are going to be allowed inside this courtroom. We won't get that sort of signature moment where Zuckerberg potentially brushes up against some of the victims of these allegations. But what does it say to you, Adele, that this trial is happening before a jury, essentially reintroducing the human back into this fierce, digitally driven debate? I mean, of course, choosing a jury must have been extremely difficult, given that almost anybody with a phone, anyone that's ever used a computer, is impacted by this.
Exactly, and I think that's what it boils down to, really, is that we all have shared stakes in this fight. We all should be able to hold these platforms to account, and so far we haven't been able to do that. You know, the same way that we might vote for a particular government, and, you know, every election cycle we are able to hold our representatives to account for the decisions they make. Sadly, we have a digital dictatorship, it's essentially, where we haven't had that role. And I feel that having a jury in this trial is crucial to sort of rewiring the dynamics of power at play here, and actually reclaiming some of that power that we should all have as digital citizens.
Now, Meta's lawyers are in court pointing to Kaley's medical records. They're looking in deep into her personal past. I mean, suggesting her mental health issues were homegrown, not caused by the technology itself. I mean, how do you respond to the argument that social media is just a kind of amplifying mirror of existing personal and societal problems rather than the cause of them?
I think it's deeply offensive for companies like Meta to be, you know, trying to frame this as something that they had no part in playing. You know, we know that social media amplifies certain vulnerabilities of various people and the harms that young people face. That is why young people are more at risk, because children are at a different developmental stage. So of course they're going to be more vulnerable to this type of harm. But I think to sort of try and eradicate that as, you know, not being a causal factor, I think, you know, this is just a classic example of powerful and incredibly rich corporations trying to wash their hands of any responsibility. And actually, we're seeing from the fact that the vast majority of children have seen harmful material, we know that this isn't something that young people seek out. This is a case of the design of these platforms pushing it towards young people.
Adele, while you've been speaking, we're also looking at some images from outside the courthouse there in Los Angeles. Some of those involved in the case directly standing, holding hands in solidarity, putting the human back into what I said was a largely digitally driven debate is going to be hugely important for this case, given how much the story resonates internationally, and also given that there is a younger generation that could well be impacted if something isn't done now. Comparisons are often being drawn with the 1990s cases brought against tobacco companies. Do you think that's a fair comparison, Adele?
Absolutely. And to be honest, if anything, this is bigger. You know, children necessarily were not smoking cigarettes. Every person in the world were not using cigarettes, but everyone is online. Every single one of us has a part to play in how we tackle and hold these companies to account. And I think this is a massive watershed moment in finally getting the answers and the accountability from these corporations.
Adele, let's reflect on this moment, because we don't know what the final verdict in this trial will be. If Zuckerberg and Meta is found not liable, what does that mean for the people like you calling for greater online safety?
You know, it definitely will be a painful setback for campaigners who have worked so hard, bereaved families who've been directly affected. But we're not going to give up. We are at a critical moment where I feel that there is massive public support and recognition around this issue now. You know, the fact that you mentioned there are so many interventions across the world from different governments that are happening at a rapid rate. Just this week, Keir Starmer mentioned the possibility of looking at these addictive design features. So, you know, whether or not this trial leads to the win that we're hoping for, I believe that there are many other mechanisms that we can keep pulling, and applying pressure on our governments is a key part of that.
And this, most importantly, puts social media squarely into an international debate as to whether or not it is at the root of a public health crisis around the globe. Adele Walton, a pleasure having you on Al Jazeera. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Don't miss out and get full picture. Subscribe to Al Jazeera for reliable news and expert insights. Like, share, stay ahead.